Hello and welcome to the Posture Dojo podcast. My name is Sam Miller and welcome to a journey of postural transformation, sharing stories from my own healing journey, transforming a 85-degree kyphoscoliosis, and speaking with experts from a variety of fields to enable and guide you on your own healing journey. Today I'm excited to be talking to Rika Brixie, who has, I think, transformed some of your more typical Pilates movements and exercises, and specifically made them for people living with scoliosis. So I'm really curious to dive into this conversation. Rika, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
How did you end up getting into Pilates and then putting your scoliosis curve on the methodology?
So I was diagnosed with scoliosis when I was 14. I was a young ballet dancer living in the UK, really passionate ballet dancer. And I was diagnosed with a thoracic C curve. At that time, it was around 39 degrees. And in the period of kind of observation that followed that, I was desperate for something that was going to help me to have the dance career that I wanted to have, help me to manage the curve. And I was very, very reluctant to have surgery. Options like bracing weren't really available at that point in time either. And that's how I discovered Pilates in the first place. My mum had always done Pilates, and she kind of guided me to an instructor that just happened to have a daughter that had scoliosis. This lady didn't have necessarily a particular specialty in it, but she gave me a set of exercises which became my nightly practice as a 14-year-old. And that gave me such a sense of control over my condition that it carried me all the way through. And I had a successful dance career, mostly in the States. I was able to do everything that I was afraid scoliosis would stop me from doing. And then Pilates was always part of my life. And when I decided to retire from dance in 2015, I came home, moved back to the UK, and a week later I started training to become a Pilates instructor. So it was like a really easy transition to something that I was really passionate about. And then at that point in time, I wasn't really working with scoliosis. I was still dealing with a lot of acceptance issues myself. And as time progressed, I realized that as much as Pilates was helpful for somebody with scoliosis, there didn't really exist a specific protocol that was designed to help people with scoliosis. And I'd sort of spent years trying to find that. Then when I found myself instructors in the UK and they were turning to me for the answer, I suddenly realized, and my boss kind of pointed out to me, that if I wanted there to be a specific protocol for working with scoliosis with Pilates, I would need to create it. And so that's what I did. I started dedicating all my time just to volunteering anyone that I met with scoliosis to work with them, practicing things in my own body, doing tons and tons of research, and ultimately put together a method which has now been proven by time, and I've seen incredible results in my clients, but in myself as well. And that's my work, really.
How has this work, been experienced in your own life and in your own kind of body? What hurdles have you overcome? What transformations have you seen by doing this work?
So I think I've always had some pain related to scoliosis. At the point when I really started to switch my focus and work on the scoliosis stuff, I was experiencing a lot of pain. And as pretty much in, I would say, a year of starting to work in this specific way, I was suddenly pain-free. Any kind of issues that I'd had with mobility were massively improved. And I also work as a teacher trainer, just generally in Pilates. So I'm required to do a lot of more advanced exercises, and all those things started to become a lot easier for me. I don't tend to track the degree of my curve that much because I tend to chart it by how I feel, how I can move, and how much it's affecting my daily life. So it became much less important to me over that period of time as well what my actual degree was, because I realized that actually I was strong, I was capable, I could do everything that I wanted to do. And as soon as I start to have a niggle, I have the right tools to do something about it now. So whether or not my curve has progressed or improved, certainly my well-being and my quality of life with the curvature has improved massively.
The usual path for people who are diagnosed with this type of condition is, if surgery or bracing isn't an option, they're kind of left for their own in a lot of cases. And then, we all go out and find alternative ways. And it's amazing that you've it sounded like fairly early on, you went right into, a path that empowered you to start becoming the sculptor of your body. Walk me through like that feeling of, you're 14, you're young, this is a lot to take in, there's so much, anatomical, medical words that are just, it's overwhelming for a lot of people in this situation. What would you say to someone, in those teenage years who are realizing that they have this diagnosis? Where do they even begin to process this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I spend quite a lot of time dealing with teenagers in that like early diagnosis phase. I think a lot of times that is when people seek Pilates because they're just, like you say, looking for something that they can do to help themselves. The advice that I always give is firstly to take what the surgeons say with a pinch of salt, because they don't tend to have the best bedside manner, and you want to gather that information and try and separate it from the emotional, which is obviously really difficult to do, especially when you're a teenager. But I remember that those appointments and that feeling of absolute helplessness, and yeah, having any degree of detachment from that, I think is a really positive thing. The advice that I always give, and to teenagers and specifically to their parents as well, is that their child or themselves is not altered because of the diagnosis. It's a diagnosis that their spine has decided to do something different for whatever reason, but they are still the same person. They have all the same great qualities. They have all the same potential to do everything that they want to do. It's just going to be a lesson that they're going to learn a lot from and build a lot of strength into them from a young age, which is a hard thing to handle. And it does just take time to process it. I had many years of real denial. Absolutely, I had Pilates as a kind of outlet, but I would say from the age of 14 until the age of 21, 22, maybe, it was a thing that was very hard for me to deal with. And I do think everyone just has to go through that process themselves and ultimately know that there's nothing wrong with them. It's okay. It's just a different shape of your spine, and you just need a different set of tools to handle it.
I'm curious, what were the lessons that came from that time of your life?
I think acceptance more than anything, because it's not something that I could change, even though I wanted to. And the options for changing it, like surgery, weren't something that I wanted to follow through on. Definitely acceptance is the big one. And that's something that I still have a lot to learn from in. And I always say often to my clients as well that I find my scoliosis is actually oftentimes my best teacher, because if I'm stressed or if I'm sad or if I'm going through something personally, usually my spine will react before anything else. So I will tend to have a bit of a flare up or start to feel pain. And it's the reminder constantly that I need to take care of myself. I always think I actually can't get away with not looking after myself because of my spine. It's a reminder of that all the time. And just accepting scoliosis as something unique as well. It's something that is completely individual. Even different people with scoliosis, no two curves will ever be the same. It's something that is unique to my experience as a human.
I agree. The situation can be one of the greatest teachers. I acknowledge and thank you for your own kind of transmutation of this energy and transmuting it into a gift for other people and now guiding other people in this situation. to start realizing that some things are outside of their control, but there are many things that are inside your control. And those things that are inside your control are the key to developing and will ultimately become your greatest strength if you truly do accept that and take on that challenge, right? I think one of the big things overlooked by the conventional system is this very physical approach. When you go in, you get an X-ray and you're measured for a degree curve. The solution or the remedy is very physical. It's a brace or a surgery. And outside of that, there's not too much going on in that space. It is changing. But when I think there's more recent studies that are showing there's a contraction of the spinal cord happening in people with scoliosis. And that is, the spinal cord is, one of the biggest pieces of the nervous system. The system that goes from our brain, which is processing and, experiencing the environment around us, and in a constant two-way communication to our body, from the brain stem coming out of the brain through the spinal cord, woven throughout the spinal cord and the rib cage, all the way down to our pelvis. We're processing the environment. And if we have these kind of stressors, tensions, fears, protection mechanisms kind of happening, that's being filtered out and experienced in the body. And so there's, especially in my own kind of journey as well, I'm realizing the importance of that. And it's a tragedy that there isn't as much attention paid to it, and how we can start using our thoughts, how we can start using our breath in order to relax that spinal cord and that nervous system, and actually create that space for the elongation and the alignment. Because when you have that restriction, that constriction of the spinal cord, you start seeing the warping effect that happens. And that's exactly what that scoliosis kind of looks like. So I'm curious, walk us through how you've adapted Pilates and how you kind of approach it in your classes and your workshops.
Yeah, so Pilates in its essence has a lot of principles that are really helpful for people with scoliosis. Generalized Pilates is a good form of exercise for people with scoliosis. But I always felt that I'd done other techniques like the Schroth method, and I had kind of gathered techniques over time that I felt like if I could use the Pilates methodology with those, that it would not only be like a great workout, but also enable me to really work on the control around my spine, developing, the specific musculature that can support me. So my method is based around really a few principles. So the first is traction. The Pilates equipment in general uses a lot of springs and pulleys, so it's the perfect place to apply traction through the spine, and that has that lengthening force that allows the vertebrae to come into a more neutral position, and then the ligaments and the soft tissue to also come into a more aligned position, and to reduce the strain through the spine. So that's a large part of my technique, along with a lot of breathing techniques, which kind of came from Schroth when I very first started working, sort of a simplified version of the rotational angular breathing that you can apply whilst exercising, but then including other more general breath work, and then using padding as well to help to align the body into a more balanced position, so that then when we exercise, we're not just feeding into those faulty movement patterns, but we're actually helping to improve balance in the musculature, develop strength in a balanced way that ultimately supports the spine.
Balance is a great one for creating that aligned strength. Whenever we have these kind of weaknesses in our balance, the process of practicing balance requires your muscles to act in, symmetry, which is exactly what we want to promote in these kind of movements. So I absolutely love integrating balance. I guess I'll share my one and only Pilates experience in Colombia, because I've traveled around quite a bit. And so I was in Colombia. I had a gym pass to try all these different types of gyms. So I went to a Pilates session. There was the springs and the pulleys, and because I had this imbalance, some of these movements for me are, can throw me off if I haven't done them before. and I had just a random type of lost my balance, slipped on my shin onto the bar, and actually just split my shin open, and had to go and get stitches at a hospital.
Oh my God.
So I had quite a, I know it's quite out of the ordinary to have a, yeah, it's quite an extreme experience of Pilates. I don't think that happens at all, so don't be worried about it. I think I was just being a little bit too, I was just in a type of, a pathway of movement that I hadn't done before, and the imbalance kind of caught me off guard, and I kind of slipped off the little sliding pulley thing. I think I was going a little bit too much weight too quick there on one of those things. Anyway, so I got to, it was quite a Pilates experience. The way that you've combined Schroth breathing, I would definitely be checking out your Pilates classes, considering you've got that experience. Because having spoken to many different practitioners of people in this space, the people who have been developing or treating their own conditions have a far deeper understanding of what's going on and how they communicate that. What's a typical Pilates class look like for you?
So a Pilates class for me, and I work mostly on the equipment, which generally speaking is safer than you perhaps experienced, but I would say it's really important that you've got an instructor that knows what they're doing. There are a lot of classes out there now where there are like 30 people in a class, and that's when accidents can happen. So important that you've got the right instructor. So I work mostly with Pilates equipment. My sessions will start usually with some form of traction, so just a great way to prepare the body for movement, and we'll then go into some breath work. A lot of my clients I see very regularly, but if it's a new client, then I'm looking at their particular curve pattern. We're figuring out how we can use padding to support them, what they need specifically from that session. And then it will be very much tailored around them. I tend to do quite a lot of mobility work at the start of the session so that we've got available movement. And then it will be a very well-rounded session where I will focus not only on the spine, but on all the big muscle groups. After a client has had a session with me, I would like them to feel that they have addressed their scoliosis and they have given their spine a level of support, but also that they've had a full body workout, because I find often that firstly that specific work around the spine can be quite a mental load, and I find people can only actually manage that for a certain amount of time. The distraction of building strength in the upper body and in the lower body, it helps the body to process all of that deep work, but it also build strength that helps to support the spine. So I like my clients to leave feeling taller, feeling lighter, and feeling that they've had an all-over workout, but again, that they have addressed their curvature.
Yeah, no, a lot of yoga is more around that loosening and that softening of the body. And there is some, styles of yoga that have that strength building, but it sounds like in Pilates you are kind of developing that strength, which I think is extremely important, because one thing is unraveling and letting go of these older compensations, these tensions, creating that looseness and that softness to allow the alignment and the elongation, but then also that piece that needs to happen is that strengthening, that activation of the more beneficial, more dynamic kind of musculoskeletal structure you've got going on there. So that's definitely kind of something that Pilates does that maybe a typical yoga session might not. Pilates seems to be more popular amongst women. Do you have male students in your class?
Yeah, I've got a lot of male clients actually. That has been generally more popular with women, and I don't know why specifically that is, because Pilates is and can be super effective for men. There's also Pilates is, like you said, like it's a little bit more strength based than yoga, but it also requires a lot of mobility. There is an element of stretching and that kind of release work, which men really benefit from as well. So definitely I have a lot of male clients and quite a few that have progressed really well in terms of building strength around their curvature and managing it. And it's a joy. I love teaching men just as much as I love teaching women.
Yeah, it could be just something where it's, men and women have sometimes different physical aesthetic goals. And, like, especially as a man being in the gym, you're drawn to more, bigger and stronger is where you start going towards. And Pilates might be more of like that toning and strengthening those core, a lot more internal strength that might not be as some of like the mirror muscles or the visible muscles.
Yeah, exactly. It's so much of it is about the small muscles. And I find men tend to come to Pilates later in life, sometimes when they have maybe had an injury or something, where they start to realize that actually those small muscles and that core strength is super important. And yeah, then they usually, by recommendation of a physio or a partner, they start to come through the door. But definitely it holds a lot of benefits.
I found it's helpful having, a goal, a direction of where you're going, kind of clear in your mind. I guess I started with, that was my kind of first goal when I was starting the gym, was just be bigger and stronger. Thought that was the direction, my North Star. Now I've adapted that because when I was with that goal, I was doing bar squats. I was doing things that I don't do now and I wouldn't recommend for someone to do if they have some type of structural or spinal compromise, because I was essentially using compensated strength, like strength that was built on the incorrect or my less than ideal kind of coordination of muscles. And so to go beyond that and to have the healing and the correction that I've found since then was about dropping that ego, taking a couple steps back, starting from zero and starting at some more basic strength, taking the weight off the bar, a lot more body weight, identifying weaknesses, identifying restrictions in mobility. And so I've had to redefine my North Star, and currently it's all-terrain agility, all-terrain capability. I want to be able to be dropped in a river, on a mountain, in a ballroom or a disco or a club or a dance floor, and be able to and move without restriction, and be able to get down low and get down high. And now that's how I kind of guide my sessions sometimes. I'll go into the gym and look for weaknesses in the body that I can kind of weed out and work through. One of the big ones was the hip mobility, especially for men who haven't done a lot of mobility work, the hips, the rigidity of, being in a masculine that might not have been as comfortable expressing that movement, I think is a big one that a lot of men are working through. I'm curious how your experience in ballet and dance has kind of evolved into your methodology.
Yeah, and I think it's actually a similar kind of thing. Like, I danced from the age of 2. There are dancers in my family, and it was how I learned to experience the world, through movement. So that is what kind of led me to Pilates. And though I'm not dancing anymore, I couldn't imagine a world where I'm not moving. That's my core as a person. And I think very similarly, like I hadn't fully accepted the curvature, but I was desperate for this career in dance, and I was a talented dancer, but with a lot of insecurity. So I just tried to get as strong and as good at ballet as possible, but I couldn't yet deal with the curvature itself, because to be honest, I was pretending it didn't exist and hoping no one noticed it, whilst being terribly paranoid that it was all anyone could see. So I was very strong in a ballet sense, but strong built on a base that was very wiggly. So when I stopped dancing, that was actually when I started to get a lot of pain, because I think I had all of these imbalances that I was held together so tightly by my ballet training, being upright, dancing constantly, that I never quite had the chance to relax and deal with what was underneath all of that. And when I stopped dancing, and I think I lost a bit of muscular strength by detraining, then those imbalances started to appear. And absolutely, I could do all the complicated things, I could make it all look good, but I knew that it wasn't good for my spine. And that's, again, I had to strip everything back and be like, right, I've got to figure this out. Because it was something that had been going on in my brain for years, of trying to understand how my spine moved, what it needed in particular movements. But in the dance world, I never had the headspace to actually pare it back because it was all about the aesthetics. And again, this is changing. The dance world is getting much more involved in movement science and strength and conditioning and helping dancers with scoliosis without to develop functional ways of moving rather than just the aesthetics. But at the time when I was dancing, that wasn't the case. So yeah, just really.
And you called it detraining?
Sorry, say again?
You called it detraining?
Yeah, I think the process of, because I had trained so consistently for so long, not a day off really from the age of about 13 until I quit when I was 21. And then a sudden drop off. So my body was going through this detraining process where I was losing strength, losing those abilities. I was doing Pilates, so I was retraining at the same time, but yeah, definitely a decline in that specific set of skills.
Yeah, the body's ability to compensate is incredible, right? And it really resonated where, you said you were just you were insecure about the condition and then just holding yourself in a way to make it appear or, not appear as much as possible. I went through that exact phase, and that's, I believe, the really the first thing that needs to be addressed in that treatment kind of process is undoing that, because years of holding your body in a way that makes you look more aesthetic is creating chronic tension in the body that needs to be unraveled before you attempt to build a new posture. And so in my body, that came in the form of, sucking the belly in, the tight hip flexors and the hips and the psoas, all of that just super tight. Because I had this imbalances higher up, I've got so much tension in that area. There's a lot that needs to be undone. And if you've been holding those tensions for years, it can take a very long time to undo those as well. But that undoing is part neuro and part muscular. It's part in the brain and part in the body. It's a psychosomatic process. And so it sounds like you're on a very good path, and it's surprising that it's left up to people with the condition like us to kind of do that.
Yeah, sometimes I do think it takes one to know one.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, how does somebody work with you? How do they find you? Where can they kind of do this? Is it in person or online as well?
It's mostly in person at the moment. Hopefully at some point in time I'm going to have more online offerings. But you can find me on Instagram. It's Pilates with Rika. And my website is rikabrixie.com. And you can find all the details there. I teach private sessions in London. And because I provide teacher training for Pilates instructors to teach them how to work with scoliosis. So I have the pleasure of traveling and doing that.
Amazing.
And that does mean that sometimes I'm elsewhere as well. But mostly I'm based in London. And I also run semi-regularly, like twice a year, I run a workshop and that is a workshop where there is dedicated space, only scoliosis allowed. And it's a 3-hour workshop where we can talk about all the things that somebody with scoliosis experiences. It's a support network as much as anything. And then we also discuss different tools, different ways of managing scoliosis, not just Pilates, but the whole kind of holistic scope of things that you can use to support yourself. Because I'm generally just a big believer that scoliosis is something that we need to give ourselves the right tools to handle and adapt things as we need to, rather than letting it stop us.
Absolutely. And is there you're doing teacher training for Pilates, is there a specific name for that, or it's really just Pilates teacher with a specialization in scoliosis?
So I teach through an organization called Basi Pilates, BASI. They're based in the US, but it's a global school of teaching. So I provide normal Pilates teacher training through Basi Pilates UK. And then I also wrote and present the Basi Pilates Pilates for Scoliosis teacher training workshop.
Awesome. Okay. Well, congratulations for doing the work, and thank you for helping people in this way. I can tell that you've combined different areas that need to be combined, that a lot of people are overlooking and the conventional medical system isn't providing at the moment. So good on you for doing that.
Brilliant. And thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you in the next one, guys.